Hi Aparna and hi Divya. It is a pleasure to have you. So we at Impact Tech Studio create opportunities for knowledge to be shared, and in that endeavor, we make sure that either knowledge or anything that leads to innovation, which is meaningful, is shared. And with that endeavor, I have reached out to you. We saw your report, and it was an amazing report. It is very detailed, and I wanted to know. And obviously, blended finance currently is turning into uh, a statement rather than a clear action. That is where I would like to start. I have been around the ecosystem, and everyone has their own definitions. So let's start with why this report, why this narrative, and why now?
Sure. Thanks, Arjun, and I think really glad to be here. I'm Aparna, for those of people who are listening in. And I represent Asha Impact. I lead their think tank, and maybe when Divya you're speaking, you can also introduce yourself.
Yes.
So Arjun, to your question, as to why now, I think that's an important one, and I'll also like to react to the statement that you mentioned, right? That it's all statements and no action. I think our experience has been a little bit different. We're seeing that there's a lot of momentum that's building up into the market. Now, blended finance per se, as you also kind of rightly mentioned, has been around for a while. It's not a new term. But why we're seeing, a lot of interest suddenly picking up around this concept is because suddenly economies are waking up to the fact that we're reaching the 2030 milestone fairly quickly. We need to mobilize, trillions more in terms of capital and sort of put that into development, for social or environmental outcomes. The government on its part, I think, has been doing a lot, and so has philanthropy. But the two sources alone, are not going to be able to solve, the sort of the huge gap of roughly $2.5 trillion that we're looking at just as India, to meet SDG objectives till by 2030. Right. So I think there's this whole, the dire need to mobilize more commercial capital, and the way that needs to be done is for philanthropic capital and government to provide some sort of risk cushioning to allow commercial capital to participate. I think the opportunities are immense, and we'll probably get to that, towards the latter half of this discussion. But that's really why, IIC and Asha Impact felt that now was the right time for us to start building a data-based narrative rather than more of an anecdotal, discussion. And which is why, the report and the database, that's really the genesis for that, to say, okay, we need to have more informed discussions around what blended finance is, who are the key actors, where has money been flowing in, where is it coming from? And that's really what the purpose of the report and database is. Divya, why don't you jump in as well and see wherever you want to add things.
Sure. Thanks, Aparna, and thanks, Arjun, for having us here. Really glad that you found the report useful. I'm Divya, and I work with the Impact Investors Council. We, along with Asha Impact, had put together the report. So, like Aparna rightly pointed, the need currently is immense for a very data-backed, scientific sort of approach to structuring these transactions and identifying opportunities in them, as opposed to looking at it as a very vast space, which can get a little overwhelming and also a little confusing for different types of stakeholders to participate, especially because we are pooling in different forms of capital together. So just given the larger narrative in the country around, the 2030 agenda, looking at the investment gaps that are increasing and the increasing requirement for different forms of innovations to come in as far as financial structures are concerned, to be able to meet both impact as well as also give a level of commercial return. And to not look at these two aspects as two mutually exclusive aspects and to delineate them, but also see if there is a convergence which can happen by looking at structures which can look at creating on-ground impact and also build in a sort of commerciality about the transaction. Right. So to be able to put all of these concepts or just this thinking into perspective, we thought it would be important for a data-backed exercise to take place. And when you read the report, you'll see the statistics as well, which can give a flavor of the scope, the breadth, and the length of the nature of transactions that can take place. across sectors and even within sectors, what kind of transactions have happened in the past that we could learn from. So because the time right now, if you're looking at scaling up opportunities, it would be important to first understand what's happened earlier and how one could use that learning. So that's why we kind of thought this would be like the right time to come out with an exercise like this.
True.
And
So
maybe just to add, so Arjun, just to add to that, I think even when one is looking at the narrative that's coming from the government, right? I think that's an important piece. We're seeing that blended finance as an approach is finding its mention in the budget speech. I mean, if you look at it last year, the finance minister mentioned a couple of sunrise sectors where the government is going to be floating some blended finance funds. They're looking at it also as an opportunity to raise money for climate financing and green financing. So I think there is a lot of momentum that's picking up in the market, and there's almost, if I can call it, like an inflection point where people feel, now sort of the right time to be looking at this as an approach.
Great, great. So let's now get to the brass tacks and ask you, what is blended finance? What is your definition of blended finance? And one question that rises out of it while I was reading the whole report was, is risk mitigation the only purpose of raising capital? Is it going into blended finance? So if you blend a finance structure, what are you really aiming for when you do a blended finance approach? So how do you take that approach? What has your learnings been from the market?
So maybe I can take a first stab at that, Divya, and then feel free to add. So Arjun, to your first point, I don't think, so firstly, I think there are multiple, definitions if you look at blended finance, which are out there, but I think all of them are sort of converging on a couple of critical factors, right? Very simply put, it's using philanthropic money as well as, sources of money from, say, the public finances, and mobilizing commercial capital and deploying that towards achieving certain social and environmental outcomes. This is sort of very simply put, no jargons, nothing. Right. But when you start kind of, unpacking the definition and global definition, and we've adopted a similar one in the report as well. I think there are 4 or 5 key aspects to, understanding what really constitutes a blended finance transaction and doesn't. And I think it's important to understand that because this term is just being used widely. I mean, I think there are certain innovative structures which may not be blended, but, people are using the term loosely. So I think, according to us, there are 5 key levers really which kind of constitutes, a blended transaction. The first is, of course, impact, whether it's, contributing towards meeting SDGs. I think that's a fairly straightforward one. Leverage, becomes important. That are we, in a transaction actually using, money from philanthropy as well as public resources to actually mobilize or co-opt commercial capital over here, which is actually seeking financial returns, right? So the leverage aspect becomes important. The third is, what are sort of the concessionality or the catalytic components of the capital that is involved. So this could be in terms of concessional interest rates. It could be also concessional terms, like, a longer payback period, for example. So what is really the concessionality that is being offered, which would constitute it as blended finance. The fourth, is what I mentioned in terms of returns. And here you see really actors coming from different orientations, right? So the philanthropic as well as public sources of capital may be trying to optimize for impact, but the commercial capital that's coming in is trying to optimize for financial returns. But financial returns is an important aspect, right? And then the last is whether the blending is happening within a given transaction or a time frame. So we've done that for the purposes of the report. So we didn't want a situation where, say, philanthropic dollars are flowing in a, say, year 1, and then 10 years down the line, commercial capital is coming in without the stated intent to do that. So we've kind of kept a slightly narrower definition in that sense, just for the purposes of the report. But these are sort of the 5 levers that we've talked about in more detail in the report as well. Divya, if you want to add to that, or perhaps address the other question around, is it just risk mitigation?
Sure. Right. Thanks, Aparna. So Arjun, like Aparna said, the 5-point framework pretty much covers everything that we kind of put together to make this exercise of qualifying a transaction as blended or not in a very objective manner.
Right.
So this is what our definition within the report for blended finance is. To answer your other question in terms of is it just risk mitigation? So yes, risk mitigation forms a very large part of such blended structures which come in. But to our understanding, one important part which is also part of the framework is understanding the leverage aspect.
Right.
Is the fact as to the actual value which can be created by $1 or one rupee, which in turn has been able to mobilize, say, a multiple of 5 times or 4 times, and that's the kind of impact which really comes out from a structure like this. So to be able to showcase that through a blended finance transaction, yes, risk mitigation ends up becoming the outcome. But really what you're trying to do is create the per dollar value or the per rupee value, which can really translate in the form of a leverage.
True.
Apart from that, what I've personally understood by looking at the different transactions, and you'll see all of it in the report as well, where in the annexure where you captured each, is a lot of these transactions are kind of getting together stakeholders which come from different, who are kind of bringing together different forms of interventions. There's someone who's coming in with a financial support. There's someone who's coming in with, say, a technical assistance of sorts. These kind of structures enable all of these different components, which eventually go into creating impact, to be kind of packed into one framework or one transaction, and
True.
not be looked as different disparate ways of functioning, and also a way of getting this ecosystem a little more tighter and closer to each other, the players closer to each other. So a lot of these kind of this kind of facilitation is what we see happening through a blended finance structure, which otherwise may have been a little more complex to kind of implement.
True.
And to kind of sum it all up, it's basically how the biggest kind of a benefit of a structure of this sorts is to be able to create something which otherwise in the absence of it may not have happened. So a lot of sectors which are perceived to be high risk, a lot of commercial investors may not have been able to get into them had a structure of this sorts not be backing it. A lot of, and also apart from just kind of generating capital, the effective deployment of the capital is also important, which comes into play when you have PA grants, you have a lot of different components being packed into the same structure. So
if I may
it's
get
only the
creative about
outcome.
it, so if I might
Sorry?
want to get creative about this word, it could be like value structuring. So you are basically structuring value rather than only dollars and how they are structured to come
That's
to
right.
your innovation. So
That's right. I think just broadening the ambit of what we call as value.
Right. So the word has expanded in the terms of what is risk mitigation. It's not a financial word only. It is also the impact of the actions and the activities that you combine together and become a structure. So that's an amazing way of putting it forward. So that's a new way of doing it. I have not found it before. So so let's move forward. Let's talk about the challenges that you faced, because such a report, I read that the respondents, the number of data points that you gathered and the extent of the audience that you took is not it's been combined together to, it might be a larger number than the people that you've already interviewed and reached out to get this data. So doing a research like this, how much time did it take? What were the challenges? Because obviously reaching out to people, organizing it, tell me the challenges that you faced doing this.
Yeah, no, Arjun, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head. So this is a first of its kind report for India, right? And like we've already talked about why we felt now is the right time to do it. We did, in the process of putting this together, speak to, I think, pretty much the entire ecosystem, at least the types of actors, right? From social enterprises to intermediaries to people providing the technical assistant grants, commercial capital providers, DFIs, Indian NBFCs, banks. So we really spanned the entire ecosystem to kind of create a balanced narrative of where we stand today and where are we really going to go from here, or where could we potentially go from here. this is by no means, an easy task. So I think having an industry body like IIC and Asha, which is like, a think tank in the development finance space, I think we kind of complemented our skill sets in that sense, right? So, but I think the fundamental issue was really scheduling time, getting the data, right? Because there is some data, yes, available in when you sort of do the secondary research. But we've taken this a step further to really try and unpack these transactions as well, classify them, create this kind of 5-point framework. And really kind of get all the details of the transactions verified. I think the key thing, Arjun, that we were also trying to do as an industry body and as a think tank is to say tomorrow, if somebody wants to structure this, they shouldn't have to go and dig the entire internet and say, okay, fine, like, what's really being done, but really present this in a form to them to say, okay, here it's been done. These are the actors, this is how it's been done. So really kind of simplify that and provide them at least one leg up to where they would have been, and one step closer to kind of designing instead of replicating, because that's really where the scale is going to come from. That's where the more capital is going to come in from as well. So I think the challenges really were to, pull that data out of people, get that verified, get time from them, bring it all together. I think that really sort of took a lot of time. And I think if I kind of rewind and take a step back, I think the first question you asked, right? What is your definition of blended finance? I think just kind of socializing that with people, creating that awareness as well, because believe it or not, some people just said we don't do blended finance. And then when we actually explained to them that this is a blended finance and you guys have actually done this, they were like, oh, of course we've been doing this for a while.
True.
And without taking names, I'm talking about some really large institutions, who we got this response from. So I think getting people aligned to this kind of thinking, this definition, took some time as well.
Amazing. So it was kind of a full-fledged effort towards organic way of making them understand what I'm asking. So kind of making them understand about the problem as well. Maybe it was the size of the organization, which was already structured in a way that blended finance is not taken well in the market. Maybe that could be the reason, if I'm not
I think it boils down to awareness, right?
Right.
And we've kind of touched upon this in a big way in the report as well. So we are hoping that this is again sort of the first point of sort of starting out more of these conversations, which are data backed. And we don't want the database to just be a one-off exercise. IIC has done this in the past where we've created a framework, we've created a database for impact investing as well. And now, year after year, there are amazing insights that are coming out of this data and people are contributing to the database. And we want to do that with the blended finance database as well.
Right.
So like
That's a good thing because
Aparna
it actually drives adoption. It drives adoption. There could be organizations that might structure it in a way that, okay, there has to be some deliverable to be reaching to some structure. So it actually eases the way into the discussion that needs to get structured in the mind and then move forward into the market. So it actually really structures it out. So I have had this opinion about structured blended finance, and every family office talks about it differently. Every way their own perceptions. So what I was also looking at is a way for anyone, at least from a data side, to reach two parts to the problem. One is, what are the universalities and what are the ad hoc customizations that a person can go for, and that kind of a framework could be coming out with the depth of data that I saw in your report. So that's one thing I went through and I was really interested to go forward. So you wanted to say something, Divya?
Yeah, I was just adding to what Aparna said, the concept of socializing this whole idea of blended finance with people. I mean, data collection kind of follows that step. So the idea was also not to just restrict, the efforts to the closure of the report, but even continuing this discussion with the different stakeholders. And on the IIC website, you'll be seeing a deal tracker, which is pretty much the collation of the transactions in the report. Just that the deal tracker is something which we now aim to continuously update. So over a period of time, what will emerge, like you said, are those is that aggregation of what is the universal acceptance or concept of blended finance, and within that larger umbrella, what are those different structures that are coming out. So it's like a data aggregation of all of it. So tomorrow, if you want to understand that in agriculture, what's happening, or in climate, what's happening, and if you are at, you are either at an advanced stage of getting into these transactions, or you're somebody who's just looking to kind of jump into it. And largely this might happen in a lot of philanthropic organizations. This kind of puts the perspective. But yes, to reach this stage was the entire legwork which happened earlier, of getting people just comfortable with understanding what is this whole process, why the data is being collected, and then being able to, of course, sift through the data, categorize it, and all of that.
True, true, true. So we've already talked about some parts of the highlights. So we'll move forward with the other, a little bit of a curious question again I had about the interesting research on perception of financial risk return in blended finance transactions among survey respondents. Do tell us more about that matrix. A little bit of perception. So what is the perception in the market? How is the market reacting to the matrix that you have in your report? A little bit on the perception of financial risk return in blended finance transactions. A little bit on that graph, please.
Yeah. Again, maybe Divya, I can take a first stab at that, and then so Ajay, I think you sort of picked up on that, and I think that's linked to one of the things you wanted to highlight as well, that we've not spoken about so far, right? So when one talks about who are sort of the key actors that are currently there in the blended finance space, we've seen, and I'm going to compare this to the global landscape as well. So there is an organization called Convergence that collects this data, globally. You've probably heard of that. We wanted to do this for India and sort of create like a public good, right? Which is why the database has been created and shared with everybody, for more sort of awareness building, etc. Now, interestingly, in India, we're seeing banks and NBFCs are kind of, occupying a lion's share of blended finance transactions. And, linked to this is obviously like the market is primarily debt. I mean, so if we look at, what is commercial and what is philanthropic, so about 80% of the capital today is coming from commercial sources. When you kind of unpack commercial sources, it's mostly banks and NBFCs, and then followed by MDBs. It's like multilateral development banks, etc., which is very different from what you see in the global scenario, where you see a lot of the bilaterals, multilaterals, etc., playing that role of providing commercial capital as well. Switch to the concessional side, I think, we've seen that's where a lot of the multilaterals, international foundations have been providing bulk of the capital. And I think here is where I think the Indian ecosystem is ripe for opportunity, if we can call it that, or it's sort of different from the global landscape. I think the money that can come in from domestic sources, be it CSR or family offices, domestic foundations, I think there is a huge opportunity over there. And why I'm bringing this is because you said when you talk to family offices, everyone has their own definition, etc., right? So I think bringing them onto the same page with regards to what is blended finance, is there a track record of financial returns, is there a track record of impact, is very, very important. Now, how is this linked to the perception question you'd asked? I think this context was important because as we kind of rolled out this survey, I think a lot of the people where we felt, were even practitioners, seemed to suggest that, there was a need for something like this because there's no common definition that everybody converges on, right? And hence, I think the survey that has been rolled out needs to be taken with a pinch of salt, because the perception that there is about blended finance is that it's, I think, moderate to high risk, low returns, high impact. So we really got to understand where that's coming from. There's a little bit of dichotomy, because when you look at the data, it's telling you that bulk of the blended finance market today is sitting in that concessional debt, guarantees, etc., instruments that are understood really, really well. And only a small portion of that is, I guess, in the newer structures like the results-based financing, like an impact bond or social success notes, etc. Now, those guarantees and concessional debts are understood by commercial capital, and they demand commercial rates, right, of interest.
True.
And yet there's a perception of low risk. So I think somewhere there, of low return and high risk. So I think somewhere that perception is coming from the fact that a lot of the instruments that actually have people's mind space or have media attention are the more high risk, low return ones and high impact. But yet the market is, on the other end of the spectrum, which is, I would say, at least moderate to high returns, if not muted, and moderate, risk as well. I mean, that's the whole point of blended finance, is to come in, mitigate that risk, with risk mitigation techniques, etc., and bring in that commercial capital. So there's a little bit of the dichotomy that we saw play out, which I thought was interesting. But I think that's also because, like I said, it's where people's mind space is. It's where media has picked up and kind of talked about a few instruments and not everything else. So I think that's really our take on this. But Divya, feel free to jump in as well.
Yeah, I mean, nothing much to add here. Aparna, you pretty much said it all. I think it all depends upon where the entire market is also, in terms of just looking at blended finance transactions, understanding them. I'm sure the conversations like what we are having currently, the report that the data that has been captured in the report will also help a lot in understanding, this vast space and putting it into perspective a little more in a data-backed manner, rather than going by perceptions, or rather what you hear or assume to be, what a blended finance transaction is. So yeah, that's pretty much agreeing with.
So as your concerted effort grows in the next periods, this report will obviously become more richer. And as it becomes more richer, the data will have more deeper insights and very close-knit data that you can really prove with case studies, I believe. So case studies might also end up becoming the new story, where the perception starts really moving towards action through case studies of some success stories of return also being an amazing measure of the impact that you've also done. So that, I think there is hope, and there is a start to that hope. So that's a great thing. So on top of it, so let's close this small conversation that I want to have with the last question I want to now ask. And that is, please throw some light on the opportunities for scaling blended finance in India. So what are the opportunities? What do you see as a highlight from your report? Anything that comes out as a low-hanging fruit or the diamond in the sky, whatever you want to put.
Divya, why don't you take that and I can add?
Sure. So in fact, we were just, this was a conversation that we keep on having, even otherwise, in different parts of our work, is to be able to understand where all blended finance can play a role. And the way we look at this, Arjun, is that to look at opportunities, yes, low-hanging fruit is one way of looking at it, but also to see the opportunities that exist across sectors, across actors, and across instruments. The fact that there is so much of scope and so much of opportunity for philanthropic capital to play a much stronger role in participating in blended finance transactions than what it currently is. Like when you read the report, you'll see there are certain case studies where CSR has come in with grant and has been able to kind of create impact, and as well as they have been commercially viable projects. You will see how foundations are supporting with TA grants, how foundations, they're coming in risk mitigation structures. So opportunities for a lot more participation from actors of this size, opportunities for more structures to evolve. Largely, like Aparna said, it's more about what has garnered the media attention, what kind of structures are more frequently spoken about. But there is so much which can be created by exploring all the other structures as well, which go beyond just guarantee backers.
True.
So opportunities for these kind of structures to evolve. And as the conversation, like, Aparna mentioned, the start of this dialogue is about, as India's climate related targets are progressing, as that's becoming a larger conversation, we are seeing health, climate, they do different sectors kind of merging and kind of converging with each other. Immense opportunity for these kind of structures which to be executed with span and which kind of transcend sectors and which can have a multi-sectoral impact. So be it agriculture, be it climate, be it health, education, of course, and skilling is pretty much there across, right? So these kind of opportunities are what we see a lot of scope for players to come in and just evolve this space into much more than what it currently is. So yeah, I think just looking at opportunities beyond just the sectoral focus or beyond just the instrument focus, but rather a more holistic perspective is what's required. Yeah,
Right.
Aparna.
Right.
Yeah, I think Divya's covered it fairly well. I think the one point I'd like to add, I think in terms of challenges, I think that we heard across the board, but also regulatory challenges, right? And we've not strategically kind of stayed away from that because there's stuff that you can control and you can't. So I think this is more, related to advocacy that we need to take up with the government. But like I said, the government is now looking at blended finance. So I think, again, in terms of the time being right now to actually take this up to them and say that, look, here is the trillions of dollars that perhaps could come into these structures in India if we offer a flourishing ecosystem for blended finance. And for that to happen, I think we need certain regulatory clarities, in terms of how can foreign capital and domestic capital be blended. I think there's a lot of conversation that's happening on FCRA and CSR and all of that, right? I mean, so there's an entire piece on regulation that we've kind of not touched upon today, but I think that needs to happen for a lot of this capital to be mobilized as well. So I think in terms of opportunity, I think that could be a huge enabler in addition to what sort of Divya mentioned, opportunities in terms of sectors, instruments, players coming into the ecosystem as well. So there is, I think, a role cut out for each of us, and I think governments kind of also have to play that part as well to mobilize this capital.
True. So thanks, Aparna. Thanks, Divya. It has been a pleasure talking to you. My opinion about the report is there are a lot of insights in the report. There is a rich amount of data on each slide, and it's a very big report that you can take it as a treasure trove for anything that you want to move into, from impact of side and any meaningful innovation. You want to pitch an idea, you want to get financing for some large project, or you just want to spread this message, then this is the right report to start from in India. So pleasure talking to you, Aparna. Pleasure, Divya. So we'll be on YouTube as well as on other platforms. So please like and subscribe. Thank you.